Okay, our next speaker I know far too well. We've become really good friends. Chris has spoken, I think, at every single Imagine conference since the first one, and there were only 5 speakers at the first one. We've become very good friends with him and his lovely wife, Linda, having visited them, and they visited us, and we've had the grand tour of Guelph several times. They've had the tour of Kamloops, and once we're done that, which is about 7 or 8 minutes, we crack a bottle of wine, and we have a guaranteed designated driver because Chris doesn't drink. I should tell him the story about the cop that stopped us on the... So we're coming back from Toronto. This was last year, and we're visiting him, and we've had a few glasses of wine. Don't ask how big the glasses were. Anyway, so it's myself and my wife Kathy and Linda, and I think we're in the back seat, and a cop stops Chris for speeding. Speeding. Yeah. Anyway, he rolls the window down, and the cop goes, "Oh my God, it smells like a brewery in there. Have you had anything to drink?" And of course, we're not really like polluted or anything. We've just been drinking wine, and it's pretty smelly. So the cop makes Chris get out of the car. He hasn't had anything to drink, like not even water, and he makes Chris get out of the car and do a sobriety test. Anyway, being the philosopher, he talks himself totally out of the whole thing. Not that there's anything to talk himself out of. He's just like, no, I don't drink, and I'm a philosophy professor and as soon as the guy heard that, he went, okay, go. His new book is 6 Steps to Better Thinking, How to Disagree and Get Along, which is available at fine bookstores everywhere, including the one here. Please welcome Christopher DiCarlo.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming out. Thanks to Bill and Kathy again and putting on such a good show. Couple of things to tell you about. There are there's a room full of registered massage therapists just down here. And as humanists and skeptics and atheists, you know how stressed out we are. So I'm just wondering exactly when the orgy of hands and rubbing is about to begin. So we should... Is it 2? After this talk. Anyhow. So, as some of you will know, I have this new book out, 6 Steps to Better Thinking, How to Disagree and Get Along. It's called what it is because there really are better and worse ways to think about things, and it actually is possible to have heated discussions, disagree entirely, and still be able to get along. And we've forgotten how to do that. We've forgotten the art of disagreement, and we certainly don't teach students this. Now, due to recent events involving Brexit, and maybe you've heard of this guy, the Oxford Dictionary's word of the year for 2016, post-truth. This is an extremely sad commentary on how information is delivered and interpreted and acted upon by repeatedly stating talking points, even if it involved false information. Some candidates said, whatever they felt was appropriate to make their point. And this was done through the excessive use of echo chambers, a media term indicating the uncritical way in which, unchecked and untrue information can be repeatedly stated over and over again until it appears to be factual. In other words, it's what, Stephen Colbert calls truthiness, right? In many cases, this is hauntingly similar to what Joseph Goebbels, the Reich minister for Nazi propaganda, said during World War II. If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. The lie can be maintained only for such time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, and/or military consequences of the lie. It thus becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its powers to repress dissent, for the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus by extension the truth is the greatest enemy of the state. So once fake news becomes accepted as factual, it feeds on confirmation bias, and it becomes entrenched in the minds of people who want to believe it to be true. However, in attempting to respond to and correct the falsities, those who wish to fact-check such claims often come under attack as belonging to a grand conspiracy who are trying to suppress the truth. Post-truth politics makes considerable use of conspiracy theories to further criticize these conspiracy theories with such inconvenient things as facts is to be a member of the lamestream media, right, or the establishment. In critical thinking, this is called insulating one's argument against criticism. It's an attempt to make any claim impervious to scrutiny and criticism. And we will have none of that in my latest book, and hopefully in society. In order to live in free and just societies, all information is open to criticism and scrutiny without exception. And so it's time to make critical thinking sexy again. It has unfortunately become it has become quite fashionable today to claim that what people feel about issues should be taken as seriously as the facts about issues. Emotional attachment to specific viewpoints and the facts about the world are often two completely different things. It's not as though a person's feelings are not to be validated. They are. However, one's feelings should only be validated up and until the point where they conflict with the facts. The term better, as in there are better and worse ways to think about things, or 6 steps to better thinking, implies that there is value to our beliefs, our ideas, and our opinions, and that some ideas are better than others. But what makes these objects of the mind and influences of behavior good, bad, better, and worse? How are they measured? Who determines the value of our beliefs? Luckily, much of the hard work has already been done. Philosophers, mathematicians, logicians, scientists, writers and artists, and many others have developed the critical thinking skills that require all of us to make such valued distinctions. So I've taken these skills and I've distilled them into 6 easy-to-remember steps. It is by no means an accident that each of the 6 steps or skills corresponds to the first 6 letters of the English alphabet. And if you've read my Pain in the Ass book, you know what they are. A is for argument, B is for bias, C is for context, D is for diagram, E is for evidence, and F is for fallacies. In this way, the letters act as a handy mnemonic for memory. Remember the letters, and you can more easily remember and apply these basic steps for becoming a better thinker. Many of you will already know this information and already use it in your daily lives. This is not necessarily for you, but it will hopefully make you a better thinker as well. It's to reach everyone. I want to see people reading this on the TTC, and I want to see it in people's washrooms. You know, I just want it to be around so people can use it as a source book. Combined together, these steps form a skill set which will allow anyone greater capacity to have more meaningful discussions about all issues, from the simple to the sublime. In other words, this is a book that quickly teaches people how to think, right? What you think is up to you. But there are specific rules that govern better and worse ways regarding how we think. And in my book, I go through these one step at a time. So, the big takeaway here. If people use the 6 steps fairly, they will be more empowered to have meaningful discussions about important issues, disagree entirely, and still be able to get along. Learning these skills will allow us to value discourse over hatred, dialogue over violence, and most importantly, fairness and understanding in our disagreements on important issues. The concept of fairness is the golden rule of dialogue, and it's actually the cornerstone of critical thinking. If we play fairly, and others play fairly with whom we disagree, I guarantee you that both sides will get the most of what they want. But, this is a very big but, both sides must play fairly. They must abide by these rules in order for this to work. If this were done more often, it would save untold amounts of time, energy, and money. But we can be greedy, self-centered, and sometimes stupid, and in so doing, decide not to play fairly. There are few values we humans place higher value upon than that of fairness. We have built-in fairness detectors within us, and as such, when it comes to decisions and judgments, we tend to dispute results less if we believe that they were at least arrived in a fair and just manner. So if we can be fair, even when disagreeing, it will increase our capacity for understanding the differences of opinions that we all share. In a world where disagreements are going to happen, we need to relearn how to have important discussions, which may become emotionally heated, but also realize that we can and should still get along. It's easy to agree and get along, but we have forgotten how to value and use the art of disagreement in civil and political discourse. It's important for the inhabitants of our planet to know that it's okay to disagree. We need to accept that we're not always going to agree. We need to realize that we can be diametrically opposed to another's viewpoints, still be their neighbor, their friend, their in-law, their coworker, or their family member. You believe in God, she doesn't. You believe the Republican or conservative political philosophy is superior. He thinks the Democrats or liberals know better. You like the Red Sox, she likes the Blue Jays. You're pro-life, she's pro-choice. I say tomato, my wife says shut the fuck up. Right, dear? The big takeaway here is that we need to relearn how to disagree and still get along. This requires maturity, diplomacy, but above all, fairness. And these are not easy traits to develop. In fact, developing and practicing them is one of the toughest challenges we face. Thankfully, the skills of critical thinking provide us with the capacity to be mature, diplomatic, and fair, and allow us to disagree in a civilized manner. For the majority of us, developing such skills will not happen overnight, or in a week, or in a month. It is something that is ongoing and requires continuous practice, development, and use. And in today's age of immediacy, where information and opinions are just a click away, there seems to be less and less time in which to practice these skills. Perhaps this is one of the reasons why so many people are feeling their way through important issues rather than critically thinking about them. Now, in an alternate Trump universe, with alternative facts, post-truth politics, and so on, there is a great need for clarity of thought, empowerment in the presentation of ideas, and directness in communication. People need to know not only when they're being lied to or presented with alternative facts or double spoken to in a hauntingly similar manner to that found in Orwell's 1984, people need to be able to call it what it is, bullshit. And they need to be able to understand the nuances and qualities of such statements in order to hold others accountable for their beliefs and actions. In ancient Greece, there were a group of philosophers known as the sophists, from which we get the term sophisticated, sophistry. Fairly well-educated people who would travel through cities and for money and entertainment would demonstrate to a crowd that they could argue the worst case and make it sound the better. In other words, they would win any debate they were involved in and could convince the majority of the crowd to take their side. The reason they could do this is because some of them twisted logic and rhetoric and used fear and any other possible device that would evoke emotional rather than rational responses. In the public audiences, the sophists ruled the day because they were so convincing and so powerful in their capacity to convince. Well, Aristotle didn't like that. He felt there had to be a foundational logic, something that could cut through this kind of bamboosery and hucksterism, which defied soundness and consistency. And so he developed some basic philosophical principles of logic known as the 3 laws of classical logic. And the first one, the law of identity, is the most basic. It's basically x equals x. So x refers to the same thing using different language. So, it would be contradictory to say a car is not a car, or a grizzly bear is a paper airplane. Right? Violating such a law immediately reveals an inconsistency. So don't try to fold up a grizzly bear and try to fly it. Some proper examples of the law identity, Raymond is bald. What does that mean? Raymond has no hair. Canada has witnessed peace for over 50 years. Canada has not been at war for over half a century. The current temperature is 32 Fahrenheit, 0 degrees Celsius. The law provides a basis for us to understand what things are by what defines them and distinguishes them from everything else. It provides consistency in our world. Imagine a world in which people and statements and objects randomly change properties and functions. So if you tried to jump into your car and drive it, but it turned into a 10-foot banana, right? Or on some days it rained water, and on other days it rained Skittles. Or gravity randomly reversed its pull. Neither you nor anyone else, nor any species on this planet, would be able to predict and exercise any type of control over their environments. So we should probably be a little more thankful to Aristotle for establishing some of the anchors of consistency. When we look at Donald Trump and we hear some of the things he has to say, what irks us is that largely he's so inconsistent, right? And this is why. He's defying these foundational laws of logic. The second one is the law of non-contradiction. A state of being and a statement and its negation cannot both be true. So it's impossible logically and physically for this sheet of paper to be entirely red and entirely green at the same time and in the same respect. I can't both be hopping up and down on one foot and not hopping up and down on one foot at the same time. So we say that a statement cannot both be true and false simultaneously, right? So to say something like the Jays won the 1993 World Series and they lost it is contradictory. It's kind of like saying you can't have your cake and eat it too. So the third law is the law of excluded middle. It states any state of being or any meaningful claim must either be true or false. It must either be true or false that you can walk 500 miles in a single day or not. And we all know that there's no such thing as being a little bit pregnant. With this law, there's no middle ground. It's a binary. It's disjunctive. It states that either something is true or not. Now, combined, these foundational laws of thought in everyday discussions are foundational to our understanding of what it means to be consistent as a criterion to which our premises should adhere. They're considered the foundations of rational thought because they disallow people from stating unaccountable inconsistencies and contradictions. So, for example, notice how many times the laws are broken here.
She's been proven to be a liar on so many different ways. This is just another lie.
Well, I'm just quoting you when
There's no quote. You're not going to find a quote from me. I don't know who.
Do you have a relationship with Vladimir Putin?
I do have a relationship.
I was in Moscow a couple of months ago. I owned the Miss Universe pageant. And they treated me so great. Putin even sent me a present, beautiful present, with a beautiful note. I spoke to all of his people.
I never met him. This is not my best friend. I was in Moscow recently. And I spoke indirectly and directly with President Putin, who could not have been nicer. And I got to know him very well because we were both on 60 Minutes.
This is a person who has been very cavalier, even casual about the use of nuclear weapons. He's advocated more countries getting them, Japan, Korea, even Saudi Arabia.
North Korea has, Japan has a problem with that. I mean, they have a big problem with it. Maybe they would, in fact, be better off if they defend themselves from North Korea. Maybe they would be better off, including with nukes, yes, including with nukes.
And South Korea with it.
South Korea is right next door.
He was for the invasion of Iraq, and you can actually hear the audio of him saying that.
Are you for invading Iraq?
Yeah, I guess so.
He applauds people who are pushing and pulling and punching at his rallies. That is not who America is.
So if you see somebody getting ready to throw a tomato, knock the crap out of them, would you? Seriously. I promise you, I will pay for the legal fees.
He also went after a disabled reporter, mocked and mimicked him on national television.
We're by a nice reporter. Now the poor guy got to see this guy. Oh, I don't know what I said. Oh.
He insulted a former Miss Universe, Alicia Machado, called her an eating machine. And on the
She weighed 118 pounds or 117 pounds, and she went up to 160 or 70. So this is somebody that likes to eat. Nobody has more respect for women than I do. Nobody.
You treat women with respect.
I couldn't say that either. Ultimately, a lot does exactly as I tell her to do.
Right, man? Is that right?
If Hillary Clinton were a man, I don't think she'd get 5% of the vote.
He said that he could not possibly have done those things to those women because they were not attractive enough. Look at her. I don't think so.
Look at her words. You tell me what you think. I don't think so.
I did not
Never
say
be
that.
assaulted.
I did not say that.
And about another woman, he said, that wouldn't be my first choice.
She would not be my first choice, that I can tell.
I didn't even apologize to my wife, who's sitting right here, because I didn't do anything.
He apologized to me, and I respect his apology, and I will move on.
Command tab. Okay. So this represents only a few of the many examples in which one individual, happens to be the leader of the most powerful nation in the world, has defied the most basic laws of reasoning and thought. On other occasions, he actually stated that the pictures of crowds at his inauguration were wrong and that God stopped the skies from raining on his inauguration, even though his wife is holding an umbrella. Other members of the crowd, like W, are all wearing ponchos because it's raining, but the skies opened up and the sun shone down because of God. These are all things that never happen, and yet Trump is such a good marketer. He believes if you keep telling the same lies, then to echo Goebbels, people will come to believe them. Right? How does that make us feel? Well, I think it can be summed up well in a single look from Michelle Obama. What do you think she's thinking? Right? Trying not to reveal too much disdain, perhaps her feelings and some of ours might, better be summed up like this. Right? So, as I mentioned earlier, agreeing and getting along is easy. Disagreeing and getting along requires the continued and consistent use of the 6 steps. But like anything worth pursuing, this takes time and practice. Here are the ways in which we can use the 6 steps to disagree and get along. So the first thing that needs to be done is to establish what each other is saying in the best possible light. In other words, what are the arguments, both yours and theirs? In establishing your intended argument and trying to establish that of the others, we practice fairness, right? This kind of cornerstone of critical thinking. So we have to make every effort to state the other person's argument in the best possible light of intent. If they go low, we go high. Always be fair, because if they're not, it reveals an inconsistency. You would expect the same from them, so we treat them with fairness. So, sometimes referred to as the golden rule of dialogue. Remember, an argument is kind of like a house. You have the conclusion on the top, the premises are the walls that support the conclusion, and then there are universal criteria to which the premises must adhere. And if they don't, the house comes crashing down. So this is a pretty good analogy that I've developed that allows students to be able to remember what arguments should look like. So when you hear somebody talking, you try to figure out what's your overall conclusion, okay? And what are you saying in support of that? And then if you can remember the criteria, you can determine to what extent they adhere, satisfy that criteria. And if they don't, you can point it out to them. And that's how we properly critique each other's arguments. We use the same rules, and we use them fairly. After you have indicated that you sufficiently understand the intent of the person with whom you are having dialogue, and been able to demonstrate this, stating it back to them, you can now proceed to discuss the value of their argument. There may be some aspects to which you agree, others which you oppose. Determine the positive aspects of the argument and any and all common points upon which you agree. Initially offer constructive criticism, and then you're allowed to offer destructive criticism, say what you don't like about their argument. With B is for bias, when the time comes for you to state the premises of the argument to which you disagree, do in a manner which clearly indicates why it is that someone with your particular set of biases would disagree, and somebody with theirs might come to believe what they now do. What biases might be involved on both sides of the issue. Now, I mentioned quite a few different types of biases in the book: biological constraints, genetics, epigenetics, and so on, and cultural constraints, family upbringing, friends, religion, and so on. Here's a short passage from the book which references how, say, age, a person's age, can bias the way in which we interpret and understand information. I must confess that in my advanced years of middle age, I tend to understand, discuss, believe, and act differently in some ways now than I did as a younger man, and certainly as a boy. So age definitely does influence and bias how we perceive and understand information and act upon it. This is simply a brute fact of life. The passage from innocence to experience is inevitable. I don't feel differently than I did when I was in my 20s, but I have experienced more at my current age, and so have a greater capacity to understand, consider, and deliberate on issues than I did as a younger man. That's not to say that it's in any way better or worse, but age is a factor that biases our understanding of information. For example, When I was 8 years old, my older brother Brad brought home an album from the record store and played it for the very first time. It was Led Zeppelin II. And when a song came on called Whole Lotta Love, and Robert Plant sang the words, "I'm gonna give you every inch of my love," a picture says 1,000 words, doesn't it? I thought it meant that he must love someone very much, like when a child is asked how much he loves his mother and he opens his arms wide and says, "This much, Mummy." But I was 8 years old. As I grew older, my knowledge of sex ed increased, and so did my understanding of what Mr. Plant actually meant by those lyrics. Point of trivia, rock photographers used to refer to Robert Plant as Lefty. I think I'm just jealous, actually. That's why I never wear jeans. You never see me up here wearing jeans, right? You're never going to see that. So we want to make every effort to understand both the biological and cultural biases, which have given rise to the differences of viewpoints we all have, right? And then consider how both of our biases have led to the current dispute or disagreement. Also consider how you might understand the issue differently if your biases develop differently. For example, would you still think about an issue the same way if you'd grown up 10,000 miles away in a country very different from your own? Here is an image from the book, and it's one I use to try to demonstrate to people the concept of biases. This is taken from an ancient Egyptian and Greek depiction where the charioteer, acting as reason, does not, in my case, I've basically just said there's two horses the charioteer is trying to control. Facts, notice the hands aren't even on the facts because facts follow the path of evidence to truth. You don't have to worry about the facts. They speak for themselves. It's our biases we have to control, right? So this is an image I bring to students at all ages to be able to depict how difficult it can be when we're very emotionally attached to certain viewpoints. For context, have we considered and interpreted the information according to the proper context, right? Have we paid particular attention to the three components of context, time, place, and circumstance, and understand that information does not exist in a vacuum? So this is kind of the fact-checking aspect of critical thinking, right? It's always situated within a specific context, and there's always a backstory to information. So we have to make sure we've interpreted their premises in as fair a context as possible. Otherwise, we run the risk of misinterpreting what they're saying, and we create a straw man out of their argument, and then we attack the straw man. So any critique against an unintended argument is worthless and demonstrates unfairness on our part. So we have to fairly represent the context in which information is housed, and this will save, again, time and energy and money. Diagramming, we try to imagine the structure of a person's argument. How does it look like a house? To what extent do their premises satisfy or fail to satisfy these universal criteria? Consistency, simplicity, reliability, relevance, and sufficiency. Those are the foundational criteria to which all premises of all arguments must adhere. And if they don't, then we can call people out. If you have the time, you can diagram arguments in a fair and respectful manner to faithfully interpret and represent the intention of each other's argument. And again, this draws on the golden rule of dialogue. E is for evidence. If any evidence is offered, what type is it? Determine the type of evidence and the manner in which it supports or fails to support the premises. Was it anecdotal? Was it legal, intuitive, scientific, right? Constructively state why you believe the evidence was acceptable or not. If it's anecdotal, you can point out that, maybe that had impact upon an individual person, but personal experiences don't always provide the type of support for a conclusion. This is due to a lack of statistically significant data which collectively supports the premises. And if intuitive evidence is offered, you can mention that intuitions are sometimes right, but they're often wrong. And if scientific evidence is offered, determine the source and the reliability of the findings. Always remember the Sagan principle, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So we can hold people accountable to their claims, and we don't have to be afraid to ask for the appropriate type of evidence. Otherwise, why should we be convinced of their argument? If their evidence is weak and does not satisfy universal foundational criteria, then the premises cannot stand and the conclusion will come crashing down. F is for fallacies, many, many, many different types of fallacies. We have the capacity to name them. I offer quite a few different types in the book, begging the question, ad hominem, ad ignorantium, and so on. Remember, just because fallacies may have been committed, it doesn't necessarily mean that the entire argument is bad or unwarranted. We may not need to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. Few, if any, arguments are perfect. So critical thinking allows us to destructively, but also constructively, contribute to the development, revision, and support of ideas, including to those to which we disagree. Now, after using the 6 steps, determine the points of agreement and commonality to understand better why disagreement is not a sufficient defense for incivility, hatred, or violence. Now, the last chapter of the book, I consider a number of controversial issues to demonstrate how these skills can be used. When I was young, my mother said, "Don't discuss religion, politics, or sex when you're in mixed company." And I would just quote Bruce Springsteen, right? We know there are hot button or controversial topics, right, that immediately leads to heated discussions. One of the reasons why these topics are so controversial is because they are so important to our everyday lives, and we are very much emotionally attached to them. But that's why it is so important to be able to have meaningful dialogues about them and have the freedom by which to disagree, but at the same time still be able to get along with one another. Today we consider any of these 6 controversial topics I discuss in my book. So euthanasia, abortion, gun control, capital punishment, same-sex relationships, and religion. For each topic in the book, I state the polar opposite views, and this allows people to situate themselves at either end of the spectrum or somewhere in between. Then I look at common ground that might exist between each point of disagreement in an effort to demonstrate how each side can contribute and disagree and still get along. For euthanasia, the polar opposites, we should allow all citizens during any point of their illness, regardless of the severity of their condition, the right to decide when they wish to be humanely put to death. Never allow any citizen under any circumstance to do this. We must do everything in our medical power to keep a person alive for as long as possible. So this allows the reader to say, okay, where am I? Where do I fall? On which side of this debate do you tend to fall? And then why? What would your argument look like if you put it into the form of a house? How carefully have you thought about this topic? If you believe that euthanasia should never be allowed, no matter what the circumstances, what has led you to have this current viewpoint? And the same holds for those who believe people should be allowed to have their lives ended through medical assistance. What we tend to find when discussing these issues is the level to which personal biases play a part in formulating our thoughts and acting on those beliefs. Some people base their disagreement with euthanasia on religious grounds. If that's the case, why might a person currently have that particular perspective which disallows them from accepting personal control over end-of-life care? And for those who wish to allow people this capacity, what evidence or premises have they developed in support of their conclusion? Perhaps the greatest common ground between these polarized views is choice. Could we agree that liberty and the freedom to choose how it is we wish to die is the common ground on which we disagree and get along? Would either side really wish to live in a society in which euthanasia was either disallowed entirely or enforced rigorously? For those who do not wish to have medical assistance during the dying process, their choice should be honored. Equally so, would we not wish to extend the same privilege to those who wish for this type of procedure? So even though we may disagree about the issue of euthanasia, do we have the intellectual maturity to accept the value of liberty or choice in making such a difficult decision? And the same is true for abortion. Never allow an abortion no matter what. Always allow an abortion. Right? Gun control. Allow total freedom of weapon possession in the home, in one's vehicle, on a plane, on a train, with a goat, on a boat, right? Should be carried while loaded anywhere at any time, right? Or no, collect and destroy all guns, legislate strict laws, stiff penalties to anyone owning or carrying such a weapon. Me debunk an American myth and take my life in my hands? I don't think so. Capital punishment. Specific crimes for which the death penalty is the only just penalty. No matter what the crime, no person, no matter what, should be put to death. Same-sex. Sex ed practice, something to be taught by parents to their children when they have reached the appropriate ages, should not be taught in schools at any age level. Religion favors heavily in this determination, right? Same-sex marriage is forbidden. Activity is a natural act. It should be taught in schools at all levels according to the maturity and age of the students. Sex freedom is tolerated, provided that it takes place between consenting adults. Nothing immoral or illegal about same-sex marriage. I know for sure that God exists and that my definition of him is 100% accurate and certain. Everyone who disagrees with me is wrong and will be punished eternally in the afterlife. I know for sure that no gods exist, believe in God and organized religions, have absolutely no purpose and should be banished. Now, critical thinking tools allow us to think more clearly, more responsibly, and better about important issues. It is through the competent and fair use of these skills that we can better understand how to have intelligent discussions, disagree, and still get along. Our successful use of such skills will require considerable time and practice, but this is to be expected. For critical thinking is not easy. It takes time and it takes a great deal of effort and continuous practice. Right? We must also embrace the concept and value of fairness in its application. If we truly value freedom of thought and expression and the free interplay and exchange of ideas, then we must do so through the continued practice and use of such critical thinking skills. In such a manner, we can look to the future with the hope that civil discourse will regain its rightful place in the marketplace of ideas. The critical thinking skill set that involves the 6 steps is taught. I teach it at all grade levels, from high school, community college, university, private sector, public sector. They're not going to change. I didn't invent the 6 steps. They already existed. I just put them in a particular order so that hopefully they're easier to remember and easier to apply. In conjunction with the book coming out, we are developing a website where any educator or any person, for that matter, can go. If you have any questions, you can send them to me. If you want to do exercises, if you want to practice these, you can do so. If you want feedback, it'll be there. We are developing video modules that all teachers can use in high schools for any course that they wish to bring critical thinking into. So it's becoming quite a portal of information that will be accessible to teachers worldwide. With our international outreach program, the Critical Thinking Project, this is working well in Guatemala and in Uganda. We now have interest in the Philippines and in Peru. So what I'd like to do now is bring up, if you want to come up, I'd like to bring up Gail Miller, the Director of Operations with the Critical Thinking Project, and David Pineda. Oh, yes. So how do we bring Gail up for that? There she is. Okay. Can you hear us, Gail?
Yes, I can.
All right, why don't you tell these lovely folks a bit about what we've been doing?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming here. Last year, 2016, Chris and I went to Guatemala and started the Critical Thinking Project. Since then, we have think protocol, and you're going to hear more about that later. We were also working in Canada. We hired a teacher for a new school term. He goes around to 8 different schools in West Canada, and our move into Mexico, where we are working with the Vocational Academy. This is a school that initially started to help young women who has a particular restriction on posted for the president therapy. Now they're coming back and being skills. Critical thinking is part of curriculum school, and we will put down. We're really excited to improve. We have that verify and their current high school, we can do this. So we continue to move on, and we still Anna, Rwanda, and other places, but their resources is prepared to provide for them at time. So we still really need support, and we really need donation. So let's turn it back now, and let me tell you how you can make donation and meet us. Okay, good?
Okay, thanks, Gail. Do we bring David up, or is he not here? All right. We have David standing by in Guatemala. Here. It looks like we're having a little bit of difficulty with getting David up. So, did he come back? No, okay. No problem. So, as Gail mentioned, we're trying to raise funds. I know the connection wasn't great, but we're trying to raise funds so that we can continue on our work in Guatemala, Peru, the Philippines, Ghana, and Uganda. In the room where they're selling books is a donation bowl. And I've been told by that man right there, Lawrence Krauss, that anybody who makes any kind of a donation, he will personally high-five you. So, one last thing I should mention. The Critical Thinking Project has taken off. Does anybody know who that is? I'd be impressed if you did, but... So quite recently, I've been contacted by the President of Ireland, Michael Higgins, to meet to discuss the introduction of critical thinking skills in Ireland. So we'll be meeting at the beginning of July to discuss the contents of the book and the program, the outreach program and whatnot. And hopefully that will lead to other meetings with other dignitaries and so on, so we can make critical thinking sexy again. Anyhow, thank you for your time.